open your eyes, and the first thing you hear is a drum.
Not a distant drum. A drum directly above you, or so it sounds. Beaten at the moment, the sun breaks the horizon, struck by priests at the top of a pyramid you cannot yet see, but whose heartbeat you feel through the walls of the room, through the packed earth floor beneath you, through the bones of your feet as you stand. You have been in this city for 3 days. You have not yet stopped flinching at the drum. You are not sure you ever will.
The drum means the sun came up. This is not a metaphor.
In the cosmology of the people who built this city, the Mexica, the people the Spanish will later call Aztecs, a nickname coined from a mythological homeland and applied wholesale to a civilization that never used the word for itself. The sun is not a permanent fixture of the sky. The sun is a fragile thing, a fifth sun, the latest in a sequence of cosmic ages, each of which ended in catastrophe. The first sun was destroyed by jaguar, the second by wind, the third by rain of fire, the fourth by flood. And this sun, your sun, the sun climbing over the lake right now, is the fifth, and it requires feeding, or it will go out like the others. The food it requires is blood. Human blood, specifically, offered at the summit of the Great Pyramids that crown every major Aztec city, given by priests in elaborate ritual, or extracted from enemy warriors captured in wars fought specifically for this purpose. The universe, in the Aztec understanding, is not a gift. It is a debt, and the debt comes due every day.
Let us place this city in its proper frame, because the frame matters. Tenochtitlan in 1480 is not a primitive settlement awaiting discovery. It is a world capital, one of perhaps 5 cities on Earth with a population over 100,000, and it is the center of a political and economic system that has been running for over a century.
The Aztec Empire. The Triple Alliance of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, founded in 1428. Controls by 1480. A territory stretching from the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico and from the dry north to the tropical south. An area roughly comparable to modern Italy, with a subject population of perhaps 5 to 6 million people. The tribute it collects annually is staggering. Tens of thousands of loads of maize and beans and chili, hundreds of thousands of pieces of cloth, tons of cacao, literal rooms full of featherwork and goldwork and jade, rubber balls by the gross, live animals including eagles and jaguars, and human beings designated for sacrifice at specified festivals. The administrative apparatus required to track and direct all of this is substantial. The Chihuahuahuatl, the empire's second-in-command, a position roughly analogous to prime minister, oversees a bureaucracy of scribes and tribute collectors and court officials that would be recognizable in any early modern state.
And yet, no wheel, no iron, no writing system capable of recording speech phonetically. The Aztec script is logographic and pictographic, capable of recording quantities, names, places, and ritual sequences, but not sentences, not paragraphs, not the full range of human thought. The Nahuatl language is rich and philosophically sophisticated. Its grammar allows levels of abstraction and nuance that scholars still marvel at, but the script does not capture it fully. The oral tradition carries what the script cannot: the histories, the poetry, the legal codes, the ritual texts, all held in memory and transmitted through the schools. When the teachers die in the epidemics of the 1520s, the knowledge dies with them at a rate that no amount of post-conquest recording can recover.
Sit with that for a moment before the city opens around you, because it changes everything about what you see here.
You are not living inside a civilization that practices human sacrifice as an aberration, a dark secret, an embarrassing remnant of primitive thinking. You are living inside a civilization that practices human sacrifice as the load-bearing wall of its cosmology, the thing that holds the sky up. The warriors who die in the gladiatorial sacrifice were honored volunteers from enemy cities, going to their deaths with dignity in a ritual they understood as a cosmic necessity. The priests who officiate are not monsters in the Western understanding. They are engineers of the celestial machinery, maintaining the equipment that keeps the sun running. This does not make it easy to watch. It makes it impossible to dismiss.
But it also means that the violence you know is coming. In 40 years, in the form of Spanish ships and disease and cannon, arrives not as salvation from darkness, but as the destruction of one of the most sophisticated civilizations the Americas ever produced, by people who had every reason to believe they were the barbarians in the story, and every resource to avoid examining that belief.
The drum is stopped. The sun is up. The city is waking.
You step outside and the city announces itself in the way all great cities do, through smell and sound before anything visual.
The smell is water, because everything here is water. Tenochtitlan is built on an island in Lake Texcoco, a shallow saltwater lake on the high plateau of central Mexico, 5,500 feet above sea level in a mountain-ringed valley. The island is real, but it is also in significant part made. The Mexica expanded their original modest island by building chinampas, artificial garden plots created by staking out rectangles in the shallow lake bed, layering them with aquatic vegetation and dredged mud, planting them with trees whose roots anchor the whole structure, and repeating the process outward year by year, generation by generation, until the chinampas become peninsula and the peninsula becomes neighborhood. And the island that was perhaps 2 square kilometers in 1325 becomes a city of perhaps 15 square kilometers in 1480 when you wake up on it. The city is literally growing as you live in it. The lake is not the city's obstacle. The lake is the city's material.
And the lake makes the smell. Fresh water and mud and the particular green scent of aquatic plants. And in the chinampa gardens visible from where you stand, the dense, complicated smell of growing things. Maize and tomatoes and chili peppers and squash and beans. And amaranth and sage and flowers. So many flowers. Because the Mexica grow flowers as seriously as they grow food. The flower world is not a metaphor in Aztec civilization. It is a category of experience that encompasses beauty, the sacred, and the highest human aspiration. Warriors who die in sacrifice are said to become butterflies and hummingbirds, fluttering in the flower world. And the equation of military virtue with garden beauty is not ironic.
The city is connected to the mainland by 3 great causeways, each broad enough for 10 people to walk abreast, each interrupted by gaps bridged by removable wooden sections. Defensive technology, as the Spanish will discover in 1520 when they attempt to cross a causeway at night and find the bridges pulled up and 200,000 people very unhappy about their visit. The causeways are the city's streets, and they are always moving. Thousands of people flowing in from the mainland every day, carrying goods to the great market, carrying tribute from subject cities, carrying the building materials and food that sustain the largest city in the Americas and one of the 5 largest cities on Earth.
The engineering of the Chinampa system deserves its own pause because it is one of the most productive agricultural innovations in human history, and it is still in fragments operating in Xochimilco on the southern edge of Mexico City today.
The Chinampa is essentially a raised garden bed in shallow water, but to call it that is like calling the Colosseum an outdoor seating area. The construction process takes years and requires collective coordination at the neighborhood level. Stakes are driven into the lake bed to define the rectangle. Then aquatic vegetation and mud from the lake bottom are layered inside the stakes, building up a surface a foot or more above the waterline. Trees, most importantly the ahuehuete, the Montezuma cypress, are planted at the corners, and their roots grow down through the structure into the lake bed, anchoring the whole thing against the seasonal water movement. The resulting plot, once established, is extraordinarily fertile. The lake water wicking up from below keeps the soil permanently moist. The organic matter in the lake mud provides continuous nutrition, and the water channels between the Chinampas allow easy canoe access for harvesting and replanting. Chinampa plots can be harvested multiple times per year, producing yields that outperform most dryland agriculture at comparable latitudes by a factor of 3 or 4.
The math of the Chinampas is the math of Tenochtitlan's population. A city of 200,000 people on a small island that should not be able to feed itself, feeding itself because the lake is not a barrier but a farm. The Aztec solution to the problem of urban food supply is not to import from the mainland, though the tribute system brings enormous quantities of food from subject cities, but to turn the water the city sits on into productive agricultural land. It is one of the most elegant spatial solutions in the history of urban civilization, and it works so well that it is still working 500 years after the empire that created it was destroyed.
At the city's heart, the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, a double pyramid, 70 feet tall, whose 2 shrines at the summit honor Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war and sun, and Tlaloc, the rain god, representing the twin engines of Aztec civilization, military power and agricultural fertility. The Great Temple is painted in white and red and blue, its surfaces plaster smooth in the morning light, the 2 shrines at its summit still faintly smoking from the morning ritual. Below it, the sacred precinct, dozens of temples, a skull rack displaying the heads of sacrificed warriors, a ball court, a school for priests, and radiating outward from the sacred precinct through the planned grid of the city, the neighborhoods of the greatest urban civilization in pre-Columbian American history.
Your house is not as different from a Roman insula or a medieval London tenement as you might imagine, and not as different as the European invaders will claim, because the Europeans have interests in how they describe it. It is a single-story structure of stone and adobe, with rooms arranged around a central courtyard where a small garden grows. The roof is flat. The floors are packed earth in the common rooms, and in wealthier houses, finished with lime plaster. There are no windows in the Western sense. Openings in the walls, covered sometimes with cloth, provide light and air. There is no chimney. The cooking fire burns in a hearth in the kitchen room, and the smoke finds its way out through the door or through the gaps between the roof beams, leaving everything inside permanently scented with copal resin and wood smoke.
Copal is everywhere in Tenochtitlan. It is the incense of the gods. A tree resin burned in clay censers at every shrine, every household altar, every temple, every important moment. The city smells of it the way Rome smells of olive oil, constantly, inescapably, so thoroughly that after a week it stops registering as a smell and becomes simply the atmosphere. When you go home someday, if you go home, the absence of copal will feel like something is missing. On the wall of your courtyard, a small household shrine with a clay figure of a deity. Fresh flowers laid at its feet this morning by whoever woke earliest in the household. Religion in Tenochtitlan is not Sunday business. It is weather, the continuous background condition of every decision, every meal, every journey, every relationship. The gods are not distant. They are present, demanding, responsive to attention, and dangerous when neglected. There are hundreds of them. Gods of maize, of rain, of love, of merchants, of pulque, the fermented agave drink that is the Aztec wine, of each of the 20 day signs of the calendar, of the wind, of the earth, of death. Managing your relationship with this population of interested divine parties is the primary organizational challenge of Aztec daily life.
The city you are walking through is by any measure the word has planned.
The Spanish soldier Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who arrives here in 1519 with Hernan Cortés and writes about it 50 years later from the vivid memory of a man who saw something he could not believe, describes a city of broad, clean streets, white buildings, towers, and temples, of such beauty that the soldiers did not know whether what they saw was real. Soldiers who had been to Rome, Constantinople, and the major cities of Spain, soldiers who had seen what they considered the finest cities of the known world, and who were stopped by the sight of Tenochtitlan with the specific shock of people encountering something that exceeded their framework. It is, Diaz writes, like the enchantments they tell of in the legend of Amadis. He means it was impossible. He means it was more beautiful than anything he had imagined could exist.
The streets are washed daily. This is not a convenience. It is a civic obligation. The city employs a sanitation force. Sources describe it as numbering in the hundreds, whose job is to clean the streets, maintain the public latrines, unusual in themselves for the pre-Columbian Americas, and collect human waste for use as agricultural fertilizer in the Chinampas. The Mexica do not dump waste in the street the way Rome does. They collect it and use it, because in a city built on water, contamination of the lake is both visible and catastrophic, and the civilization understood this in practice, if not in germ theory. The drainage management of Tenochtitlan is alongside its agricultural engineering, the infrastructure achievement most likely to astonish a modern urban planner.
You follow the flow of people north, through the Causeway district, past the gardens and the dye workshops and the potter's quarter, to the place that made the Spanish conquistadors stop cold and reach for their pens before they reached for their swords, the market of Tlatelolco.
Hernan Cortés, writing to King Charles V of Spain in 1520, a man not given to sentiment, a man writing a legal document to justify his unauthorized conquest to a monarch who had not authorized it, stops his letter to describe what he saw at Tlatelolco and cannot stop himself from spending 3 full paragraphs on it, in a letter that was supposed to be about military operations. He writes that the market is twice the size of the city of Salamanca. He writes that more than 60,000 people trade there every day. He writes that every kind of merchandise produced in the land can be found there, and he proceeds to list them: gold, silver, jewels, feathers, cloth, embroidered goods, chocolate, deerskins, vanilla, slaves, displayed on poles as calmly as if they were being sold in the slave markets of Portugal. Cooked food, raw food, pottery, wood, coal, building materials, herbal medicines, and every variety of live animal. He writes that there are men whose only job is to walk through the market observing every transaction, correcting fraud, and settling disputes. Market inspectors with effective and immediate authority. He writes, "I do not know how to describe it, for it is so large and so full of different kinds of things
that I do not know where to begin.
Cortés, who had just spent weeks destroying his way up the coast of Mexico, did not know where to begin describing the market. Let us begin with the food.
Because the food of Tenochtitlan is where the Aztec civilization makes its most lasting contribution to the world you live in. And the contribution is so vast that it is invisible, which is the nature of contributions that succeed completely.
Walk the food section of the market. Count what you see. Maize in a dozen forms. Dried ears, ground flour, cooked tortillas, tamales steaming in corn husks, atole, a warm maize gruel, in clay cups, tomatoes, which no European has ever seen, avocados, unknown outside these mountains, chocolate, cacao beans ground with vanilla and chili and water into a bitter spice drink consumed by warriors and nobles and offered to the gods, a luxury so valued that cacao beans serve as currency throughout Mesoamerica. A tamale costs 1 bean. A turkey egg costs 3. A live turkey costs 100. Chili peppers in red, green, yellow, smoked, dried, fresh, ground. Squash and sweet potato and beans. Vanilla pods, pineapple, papaya, guavas, jicama, chia seeds, amaranth ground into flour and mixed with honey and blood to make the edible figures of gods that worshippers consume in a ritual the Spanish priests will find disturbingly familiar.
Now make a list of everything on your table at your last meal before you came here. Tomato, chocolate, vanilla, chili pepper, avocado, maize. Squash, sweet potato, beans. The food of your world is, to a degree that most people never realize, the food of the civilization you are standing in. The Columbian Exchange, the transfer of crops between the Americas and the rest of the world after 1492, is the single most consequential agricultural event in human history, and Tenochtitlan is its central warehouse. The Italian tomato sauce, the Hungarian paprika, the Belgian chocolate, the Indian chili, the American corn. All of it flows outward from this market, from this island, from this civilization that will be destroyed before it ever learns what it contributed.
The Pochteca merchants deserve their own paragraph because they are one of the most interesting social inventions in the Aztec system and one of the most overlooked. The Pochteca are the long-distance traders of Tenochtitlan, a hereditary merchant guild organized into their own neighborhoods, with their own god, Yaquetequet, the Huerto Tecuhtli, the Lord who guides, their own courts, their own ritual calendar, and their own remarkably complicated social position. They are wealthy, sometimes staggeringly wealthy, wealthy enough to finance feasts that challenge those of the nobility. But they are obligated by social code to hide their wealth, to dress modestly, to arrive in the city at night to avoid ostentatious display. The merchants travel in armed convoys to distant trading partners, carrying luxury goods, quetzal feathers, jaguar skins, jade, gold, turquoise, and returning with exotic merchandise from regions the Aztec army has not yet reached. They serve in the process as intelligence agents, reporting on political conditions in far lands, identifying potential targets for military expansion, occasionally triggering wars whose military action will then consolidate trade routes they previously risked alone. The Pochteca are simultaneously inside and outside the Aztec class system, and the tension is productive. The nobility despises merchants in principle. Commercial work is beneath the warrior class and needs them in practice because the luxury economy runs on Pochteca networks. the merchants respond with elaborate ritual humility that barely conceals their power. When a successful Pochteca returns from a major trading expedition, he stages an arrival ceremony that includes distributing gifts to nobles, sponsoring a public feast, and performing devotions to Yacatecatekli, all of which functions as both genuine piety and very effective political advertising. The Aztec merchant, like the Roman freedman, is a figure who accumulates power in the gaps that the official hierarchy doesn't know how to close.
The architecture of Tenochtitlan, as distinct from the Templo Mayor that dominates every view, reveals the Aztec relationship with beauty in its most everyday form.
The noble houses of Tenochtitlan are described in the sources as airy, well-lit structures, with elaborate courtyards, fountains fed from the aqueducts, and garden rooms containing the bird collections and botanical specimens that every wealthy Mexica family maintains as a mark of culture and status. The aqueducts. There are two, running from the springs at Chapultepec on the mainland, deliver fresh water continuously, and the wealthiest houses tap into them directly, giving nobles running water in their courtyards in a city otherwise dependent on canoe water delivery for the common population. The floors of high-status rooms are covered in mats of woven reed, or in the grandest spaces, lime plaster painted with geometric designs in red and black and blue. The walls are hung with cotton cloth, elaborate, highly colored textiles produced by the women of the household or purchased at the market in Tlatelolco, where a single fine embroidered cloak might cost 40 cacao beans. And everywhere, built into every structure, maintained by every household, present at every ceremony, the colors. The Aztec color palette is extraordinary. Deep reds from cochineal, the insect cultivated on cactus paddles in Oaxaca and traded throughout the empire, producing a crimson so vivid that it will, after the conquest, become the most valuable textile dye in the world. Turquoise blue from azurite, yellow from flowers, deep black from obsidian and charcoal, the iridescent green of the quetzal feather, available only from the cloud forests of Guatemala, and more valuable than gold by weight, worn only by the highest nobility and offered to the greatest gods. The visual texture of Tenochtitlan, in every source that describes it, is one of saturated color, not the pastel tones of academic reconstruction, but dense, brilliant, almost overwhelming pigment laid over stone and cloth and ceramic and skin.
Before we leave the market, one more commodity deserves attention, not because it is the most dramatic, but because it reaches furthest into your present, the obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass, formed when lava cools rapidly, and central Mexico sits on one of the richest deposits of it on Earth. The Mexica quarry at Teotihuacan, the ancient ruined city northeast of Tenochtitlan, already 1,000 years abandoned by 1480, whose origins and builders the Aztecs do not know but whose presence they regard with awe, calling it the place where men become gods and incorporating it into their sacred geography. And at deposits in the mountains to the north, obsidian can be knapped into blades of almost incomprehensible sharpness. The obsidian blade edge, examined under an electron microscope, tapers to a monomolecular point, thinner than the sharpest surgical steel. Aztec surgeons use it for precise incision. Modern surgeons in some specialized procedures use obsidian scalpels for exactly this reason.
The macuahuitl, the Aztec war club, is a wooden paddle with obsidian blades set along its edges, and it is terrifying, The blades are sharp enough to cut through a Spanish soldier's armor and have been documented cutting the head off a horse in a single blow. The Spanish, when they finally engage Aztec warriors in sustained combat, discover that their steel swords have a significant advantage in durability. Obsidian shatters when it hits steel, while steel does not shatter when it hits obsidian. But that the Maquahuatl in the first exchange is as dangerous as anything their own armories produce. The obsidian in the market comes in many grades, traded throughout Mesoamerica, and buying even the most modest blade in the market stall connects you to a trade network that reaches from this lake to the volcanic mountains, to the processing workshops, to the potteca who carry the finished blades to cities that have no obsidian of their own, and will pay cacao beans for the privilege of cutting cleanly.
And the food one more time, because one item deserves its own moment. Chocolate.
Chocolate, chocolat, is the drink of gods, warriors, and nobility. The cacao tree grows only in the tropical lowlands far from Tenochtitlan, which means every bean in the city has traveled hundreds of miles overland by human carrier. Because the Aztec Empire has no wheeled vehicles and no draft animals larger than a dog. Every luxury in Tenochtitlan arrived on someone's back, and the cacao that flavors the noble's drink was carried by men who walk the mountain trails through cloud forest and dry scrubland, bearing loads that modern porters would find punishing, over routes that take weeks. The cost of this logistics is embedded in the bean's value as currency. 100 beans for a live turkey means the turkey is worth 100 journeys down the mountain in miniature.
The drink itself is nothing like the chocolate, you know. It is made cold, or sometimes at room temperature, by pouring the liquid from one vessel to another to create a froth. The froth is the mark of quality. The thing nobles discuss the way wine drinkers discuss tannins. It is bitter, spiced with vanilla and chili, and sometimes with achiote for color, mixed with water or maize gruel, occasionally with honey. There is no sugar in it. The sweetness that will make chocolate beloved to the world does not exist yet. The cane sugar that transforms it arrives from the old world after the conquest. The chocolate of Tenochtitlan tastes of bitterness and spice, and the cold of a high-altitude morning. And it is both a beverage and an offering, consumed by humans and poured for gods and carried in clay vessels by the potteca to the edges of the known world. And 40 years from now, it will travel in those same vessels to Spain and change everything. Silently, gradually, the way all the best flavors change the world, one cup at a time.
The tribute system that feeds Tenochtitlan also tells you something about the nature of the Aztec Empire that the pyramid tends to overshadow. It is less a territorial state than a network of obligation.
The Aztec Empire does not govern its conquered territories the way the Roman Empire governed Gaul or Egypt, with Roman administrators, Roman law, Roman garrisons, Roman roads connecting the whole to the center. The Aztec approach is lighter, cheaper, and in the long run more fragile. You defeat a city-state in military conflict, you install a tribute obligation, and you go home. The local ruler stays in power. The local religion continues. The local language continues. The local social structure continues. What changes is that a portion of the city-state's production, sometimes a large portion, calibrated by negotiation and recorded in the meticulous tribute rolls of Tenochtitlan's administrative class, now flows upward to the Triple Alliance instead of staying local.
The tribute rolls that survive, most famously the Matricula de Tributos and its copy in the Codex Mendoza, compiled after the conquest from Aztec records, list the obligations of some 400 subject towns in extraordinary detail,
So many loads of maize per season, so many decorated blankets per year, so many bundles of quetzal feathers, so many bags of cacao, so many warrior costumes, so many pieces of jade. The lists are precise and exhaustive, and they reveal both the empire's reach. Goods from the tropical coasts, from the high mountains, from the dry north, flowing to the lake island in the center, and its fundamental bargain: we will not destroy you. We will let you run your own affairs. We will give you access to our markets and our protection, and in return, you will give us what we need to sustain the sun.
This arrangement works until it doesn't. Subject city-states rebel when the tribute becomes too onerous, when a bad harvest makes payment impossible, or when a political change in Tenochtitlan creates an opening. The Aztec army reconquers them, always reconquers them, because the military is genuinely formidable, and raises the tribute as punishment. It is a system that creates progressively a population of subject peoples who are not Aztec, but are not quite conquered either, who maintain their identities and their grievances in parallel, and who in 1519 will look at the strangers with the horses and the guns and the diseases and make a series of rational calculations about alliance.
There is one more section of the market you need to visit, because it tells you something about Aztec civilization that the sacrifice obscures: the flower quarter.
The market has an entire section devoted to flowers. Not medicinal plants, not food crops, not dye plants for textile work. Flowers for beauty, for adornment, for the sheer experience of looking at them and smelling them. The Mexica are one of the most sophisticated flower cultures in history. They cultivated hundreds of species, developed complex garden design as an art form, and created the floating Chinampa gardens partly because they needed more land for floral production. The nobles maintained elaborate pleasure gardens at their estates outside the city. Botanical gardens, in the modern sense, maintained for intellectual pleasure and aesthetic experience. Montezuma's famous gardens at Huaxtepec, visited by the Spanish in 1521, contained plants from every ecological zone in the empire, labeled and categorized, tended by full-time botanical staff. They were destroyed within the year.
The flower market in Tlatelolco sells to everyone. Nobles buying elaborate arrangements for ceremonies, priests purchasing the specific varieties required for ritual offerings, ordinary people buying a single bloom to place at a household shrine or to wear in their hair for a festival. The visual texture of Tenochtitlan, in everything the sources describe, is one of dense color. Painted buildings, feathered costumes, flowering gardens, and always flowers. Flowers carried and worn and offered and strewn. The civilization that practiced the most elaborate system of ritual sacrifice in the Americas also grew more flowers than any civilization of its size on Earth. This is not a contradiction. This is the Aztec Empire insisting that both things are true, and that anyone who can only see one of them is missing the point.
There is something about Tenochtitlan that takes time to notice. Longer than the market's abundance, or the pyramid's height, or the flowers in every corner. It is the time.
Time in the Aztec Empire is not a background condition. It is a substance, a landscape with its own topology, and navigating it requires a map as complex as any the Patacaca carry on their trading routes. The Mexica used two calendars simultaneously, interlocked in a system of such mathematical elegance that it took European scholars decades after the conquest to decode it. And that still, 5 centuries later, functions as a precise and internally consistent description of temporal cycles at multiple scales.
The first calendar is the Shupahuali, the year count, a 365-day solar calendar divided into 18 months of 20 days each, with 5 extra days at the year's end. The Nemontemi, the empty days considered deeply unlucky, during which no serious business was conducted, no children were born if it could be helped, and the world held its breath. The Shupo Huali tracks the agricultural year, the festival calendar, the administrative obligations of the empire. Every month has its own deity, its own associated colors and foods and activities, its own specific rituals.
The second calendar is the Tonal Powili, the day count, a ritual calendar of 260 days, created by combining 20 named day signs with 13 numbers in a cycle that repeats every 260 days with no correspondence to any astronomical period. It is, in this sense, a purely cultural creation, a human-made temporal structure imposed on the natural world rather than derived from it. The Tonopo Huyali is the calendar of fate. Every day in the cycle carries a specific character and omen. Some days are favorable for planting, others for war, others for commerce, others for beginning a journey. Some days are lucky for children born on them, others catastrophically ill-omened. The Tono Puk, the day counters, the priests who read the calendar, are among the most consulted specialists in Aztec society. You would not name a child, launch a military campaign, open a merchant expedition, build a house, or contract a marriage without consulting the Tonopo Huyali for the character of the day.
When the two calendars are run simultaneously, and they always are, they create a larger cycle, the calendar round, in which any given combination of Shilpohueli date and Tonopohueli date repeats only once every 52 years. 52 years is an Aztec century, and the end of each calendar round is a moment of genuine cosmic anxiety, because the Mexica believe that the universe might simply choose not to continue. The new fire ceremony, the most solemn ritual in the entire Aztec calendar, takes place at the end of each calendar round. All fires in the empire are extinguished. The people wait in darkness on their rooftops. The priests climb a mountain and attempt to kindle a new fire on the chest of a sacrificed warrior at the precise midnight when the Pleiades cross the zenith. If that does not, it always does, but the fear is real. The sun will not rise, and the star demons of darkness will descend to eat humanity. When the fire catches, runners carry torches to light the temple fires in every city in the empire, and the people come down from their rooftops, weeping with relief, cutting their ears, and scattering blood as thanksgiving, knowing they have 52 more years of sun.
You have been here 3 days. The new fire ceremony is 40 years away. But you understand, standing in the market watching people check the day sign before they do business, watching the priest at the shrine corner consult his almanac before he lights the morning incense, you understand that the calendar is not an administrative convenience. It is the operating system of reality, and everyone here is running on it.
The children are the most revealing thing about any civilization, and in Tenochtitlan, the children go to school.
This is not obvious in the ancient world. Compulsory public education, state-funded schooling available to all children regardless of class, is rare. Most ancient civilizations educate only the elite. The Aztec Empire educates everyone, and it does so through 2 distinct institutions that track social destiny while providing a floor of literacy, physical training, and civic knowledge to the entire population.
The Telpak Kali.
The House of Youth is the school for commoners. Every neighborhood has one. Children enter around age 15 and spend years learning warfare, practical crafts, civic duties, and the histories and songs of the Mexica people. The education is practical, communal, and oriented toward military service. The Aztec army is a citizen army, and the Telpacali is where citizens become soldiers. But it also teaches the sacred hymns, the myths, the protocols of ceremony, the shared cultural knowledge that makes an Aztec person Aztec. Boys and girls attend separately, girls learning the skills of household management and weaving alongside civic knowledge.
The Calmecac, the House of Learning, is the school for the elite, the sons and some daughters of nobles and priests who enter as young children and undergo an education of extraordinary rigor. The Calmecac curriculum includes writing, the Aztec pictographic script, astronomy, history, law, rhetoric, and the full complexity of the priestly calendar and ritual. The Calmecac produces the administrators, priests, and senior warriors who run the empire. It is also by the accounts brutal. The children sleep on hard mats, eat minimal food, bathe in cold water before dawn, and are punished physically for failures of conduct. The Spartans would have recognized the pedagogy, if not the content.
But here is the thing that genuinely distinguishes the Aztec educational system from most of its ancient contemporaries. It is not purely hereditary. Commoner children of exceptional ability can be admitted to the Calmecac by the decision of their neighborhood council. Warriors who display extraordinary valor in battle can elevate their social standing regardless of birth. The class system is rigid, but not sealed. Mobility exists, flows upward through the channels of military distinction and scholarly achievement, and the empire invests in identifying and elevating talent because it needs it. A meritocratic streak runs through the Aztec hierarchy, narrow and imperfect, but real.
The Aztec understanding of the body and medicine deserves a note, because it is both sophisticated and radically different from anything in the European or Asian traditions.
Aztec medicine is documented in the Badianis manuscript, a herbal compiled in 1552 by an Aztec physician named Martin de la Cruz and translated into Latin by a student named Juan Badiano, preserved by accident in the Vatican Library, rediscovered in 1929, and in the medical sections of the Florentine Codex. What emerges is a system that combines botanical pharmacology of genuine effectiveness with ritual diagnosis and treatment that operates on a completely different model of causation. Illness in the Aztec framework can have natural causes, imbalance of the body's heat and cold, injury, dietary failure. But it can also have supernatural causes, soul loss, witchcraft, the anger of a deity, the malignant influence of a day sign. The Ticital diagnoses by examining the patient, by watching the movement of blood through the wrist, and by casting maize kernels or other divination objects, reading the pattern to identify whether the illness is natural or supernatural in origin, and treating accordingly.
The botanical treatments are sometimes highly effective. The Badianus manuscript describes over 200 medicinal plants, including treatments for skin conditions, infections, dental pain, and gastrointestinal problems that modern pharmacologists have found to contain genuine active compounds. Datura and morning glory, powerful psychoactive plants used in ritual contexts, are known and their effects understood in practice if not in neurochemistry. Cocoa was prescribed as a treatment for fatigue, vanilla for nausea, various chili preparations for throat ailments, the empirical element of Aztec medicine, built on centuries of observation in an ecosystem of extraordinary botanical diversity, was producing knowledge the Spanish would spend decades trying to extract and classify, and mostly failing too, because the knowledge was embedded in a tradition they were simultaneously destroying.
Gender in Tenochtitlan does not map onto modern categories, and any honest account has to sit with that discomfort rather than resolve it too quickly.
Women in Aztec society are not property in the Roman legal sense, but they operate within a framework of defined roles that grants certain powers and denies others. A noblewoman can own property, can manage a household economy, can testify in legal proceedings, can be a priestess of considerable status. The market is full of women traders. The sources describe female vendors as a permanent feature of every market in the empire, not a marginal presence. Midwives, centrally, are highly respected medical professionals, called with ceremony to a birth, and compensated with goods that reflect their expertise. Weavers, the production of elaborately decorated cloth is predominantly female work, are assessed on the quality of their output with the same seriousness that warriors are assessed on the quality of their military performance.
But the framework also demands that women's ambition express itself through weaving, through household management, through the production and raising of children, especially of sons who might become warriors. The birth of a boy triggers a ceremony in which a miniature shield and arrows are placed in the baby's hand, and the midwife makes a speech about his future military destiny. The birth of a girl triggers a ceremony in which a spindle and weaving shuttle are placed in her hand, and a speech is made about her duty to the household. The Aztec world is not egalitarian by any modern measure, but it is not as simple as subjugation either. A woman who weaves extraordinarily well, who manages a large household with intelligence, who serves as a competent midwife to her community, she has dignity, authority, and social standing that the European women of the same period in many respects do not. The specifics differ. The constraint is shared across cultures.
The ball game needs its own passage, because no description of Aztec civilization is complete without it, and no description of it is complete without acknowledging that it is strange in a way that the modern mind finds hard to organize.
The game is Tlachtli, or Ulamalesli, and it is played on a long, narrow, eye-shaped court in Tenochtitlan and throughout the Mesoamerican world, by a tradition that stretches back 3,000 years before the Aztecs exist. The ball is rubber, solid natural rubber, heavy and bouncing, made from the sap of rubber trees in the tropical lowlands, and it cannot be touched with the hands or feet. Players strike it only with their hips, knees, and elbows, driving the ball down the court in a game whose exact rules are debated, but whose general shape involves keeping the ball in play, scoring by getting it through stone rings mounted vertically on the court walls, and interpreting every game as a cosmic reenactment of the struggle between sun and night.
The cosmic dimension is not decorative. The ball game is a ritual as much as a sport. Courts are found in every Aztec sacred precinct. Tournaments are conducted as religious events, and the results carry interpretive weight about the condition of the cosmos. The players are athletes of extraordinary skill. Hitting a solid rubber ball through a ring barely larger than the ball with your hip requires years of training and a physical precision that modern athletes who have tried to replicate it find nearly impossible. They are also, in the most important games, potentially playing for their lives. Sources describe the losers, or winners, in some interpretations. The texts are ambiguous, being sacrificed after major ritual games. Whether this was universal practice or a specific high-stakes ritual is still debated. What is not debated
is that the ball game was a feature of Mesoamerican civilization for over 3,000 years, that Tenochtitlan has multiple courts, that crowds gather to watch them, and that gambling on the outcome, betting cloaks, cacao, slaves, land, is as popular among the spectators as sacrifice is solemn among the priests.
The sun is dropping toward the mountains to the west. The market is closing. The drum on the pyramid is silent between its morning and evening beats. You have been avoiding this part of the day, not because you did not know it was coming, but because knowing and standing in it are different things, and you have preferred until now to stand elsewhere.
But the Aztec Empire does not permit its visitors to look away. It does not hide this. The Tzompantli, the skull rack, stands in the sacred precinct beside the ball court, in plain sight, holding the skulls of sacrificed warriors in their thousands, visible from the market, visible from the causeways, visible from the boats on the lake. The sacrifice is not a secret. It is the point. It is the advertisement of a cosmological commitment that the Empire wears on its architecture, the way other civilizations display their god's face on a cathedral.
Let us walk up the pyramid. The Spanish who did this, who climbed the Templo Mayor with Montezuma at Cortés' request in the first weeks of the encounter, were shown the view from the top, the great city spread across the lake below, and at the summit, the shrines and the altars and the evidence of recent ritual, and their reaction is in the record. Bernal Diaz writes about the smell. The smell of the shrines is the first thing he mentions. The reek of blood on stone, copal resin over everything, the biological residue of a ceremony that does not waste what it takes, but also does not apologize for what it is.
The mechanics of sacrifice in the Aztec ritual are documented in detail by both the Spanish priests who were horrified by them and the Mexica sources who recorded them without horror. In the Florentine Codex that Friar Sahagún compiled from Aztec informants in the decades after the conquest, native voices explaining their own civilization to a world that was already destroying it. The sacrifice is performed by priests at the summit of the pyramid. The sacrificial victim, ideally a captured enemy warrior, though other categories of victims exist for specific rituals, is stretched backward over the curved sacrificial stone by 4 priests, one holding each limb. A 5th priest cuts through the chest with an obsidian blade, reaches in, and extracts the still beating heart, which is raised toward the sun before being placed in a stone vessel. The Quauxicalli, the eagle vessel, offered to Huitzilopochtli. The body is then tumbled down the pyramid's steep stairs.
The victim's fate in the Aztec afterlife is not the worst available. Warriors who die in sacrifice or in battle go to the house of the sun, the highest of the 13 heavens, and spend their afterlife accompanying the sun across the sky as hummingbirds and butterflies. The flower world, a paradise of color and warmth. The women who die in childbirth occupy the same paradise, accompanying the sun on its afternoon journey. Because the Mexica consider dying in labor the female equivalent of dying in battle. Both are sacrifices to sustain life, and both earn the same celestial reward. The worst Aztec afterlife, cold, wet, the domain of Mictlantecutli the death god, is not reserved for those who die badly. It is reserved for those who die of illness or old age. The unromantic deaths, the deaths that produced nothing cosmic.
To understand the scale of sacrifice in Tenochtitlan, you need to understand the Flower Wars. And to understand the Flower Wars, you need to understand an empire that is running out of room.
By 1480, the Aztec Empire controls most of central Mexico through a tribute system. Conquered city-states pay regular deliveries of goods: maize, cloth, jade, gold, cacao, feathers, rubber balls. To Tenochtitlan, which distributes them through the palace economy, the Poctica networks, and the ceremonies that hold the political coalition together. The empire is large, but not universal. There are unconquered neighbors, most notably the Tlaxcalans to the east, who will become the Spanish's most important military allies in 1519, precisely because they have been resisting Aztec expansion for a generation.
But the Empire's expansion has a problem that the tribute system creates. The further the conquered territories, the more expensive the military campaigns, the thinner the administrative control, and the greater the risk of rebellion. Expansion is simultaneously the Empire's source of strength. New tribute, new labor, new sacrifice victims, and the mechanism of its overextension. By the late 15th century, the Triple Alliance of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan is managing an empire of roughly 5 million people over an area comparable to modern England. And the management is increasingly dependent on a cycle of military demonstration, ritual sacrifice, and tribute extraction that would need to expand continuously to sustain itself.
The Flower Wars. Yokioyotl are the partially formalized conflicts fought with unconquered neighbors, specifically to capture warriors for sacrifice. Both sides understand the purpose. Both send trained warriors. Both collect their dead and their prisoners with ceremony. It is, in a sense, ritualized violence that substitutes for total war. A managed system of conflict that keeps the sacrifice supply running without the existential risk of all-out conquest attempts against peoples who have proven resistant. The Tlaxcalans fight the Flower Wars for decades against Tenochtitlan and do not fall.
In 1319, Cortés arrives in Tlaxcala and finds 20,000 warriors who have been fighting the Aztec Empire for a generation, and are very interested in the metal-armored strangers, with the exploding weapons and the biological weapons they do not yet know they are carrying.
One more institution before the day gives way to the offering: the Temazcal. The Temazcal is the Aztec sweat bath, a low dome-shaped stone structure heated by pouring water over fire-heated stones, filling the interior with steam, used for cleansing, healing, religious ritual, and childbirth. It is the Mesoamerican equivalent of the Finnish sauna and the Roman caldarium, independently invented, serving the same fundamental human need. The body purified by heat, stripped of its daily accumulation, returned to something clean. The Temazcal in Aztec culture is presided over by a deity. Temazcaltesi, grandmother of the sweat bath, an old woman deity associated with the earth and with medicine, and using it is a ritual act as much as a hygienic one. Women use it after childbirth. Warriors use it before major campaigns. The sick use it as treatment for fevers, joint pain, and skin conditions. The Temazcal is also where the city's children are bathed after birth in a ceremony conducted by the midwife, who washes the infant with formal words addressed to the water itself, because water in the Aztec understanding is not a neutral substance, but a sacred one, the domain of Calchulicli, she of the jade skirt, goddess of lakes and rivers, and the amniotic fluid of birth. The midwife speaks to the water. The water receives the child. The child enters the world clean, addressed to the sacred fluid that covered the lake island on which it was born. It is a beginning as deliberate and as beautiful as any the ancient world devised.
The fall is not the story of a weak civilization overwhelmed by a stronger one.
It is the story of a catastrophic biological event combined with a geopolitical miscalculation, and it happens faster than anyone, Aztec, Spanish, or Allied, can process.
Smallpox arrives in 1520, before the Spanish military campaign that takes Tenochtitlan has reached its final phase. It comes from one infected slave in a Spanish expedition, and it moves through a population that has never encountered it and has no immune defense. Not one person in Tenochtitlan has any resistance at all, with a speed and lethality that defies any military analogy. Estimates of the death rate in the first epidemic run as high as 50% of the population within months. Montezuma's successor, Cuitlahuac, who drove the Spanish out of Tenochtitlan in the disaster the Spanish call the Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, dies of smallpox 80 days after taking power. The population that might have successfully defended the city is crippled before the final siege begins.
The siege itself takes 75 days. The Spanish, with their Tlaxcalan allies, systematically destroy the causeways, the aqueducts, the chinampas, the buildings, methodically dismantling the city's infrastructure while the population starves and dies of disease inside it. The defenders, under the last emperor Cuauhtémoc, fight house by house, canal by canal, to the end. When Cuauhtémoc is finally captured, attempting to escape by canoe across the lake, the city is a ruin. Of the 200,000 people who lived here, perhaps a third are dead, the rest scattered. The temples are demolished. The skull rack is torn down. The lake is eventually drained. Mexico City is built on top of the rubble, literally, using the stones of the Templo Mayor as building material. And the Aztec civilization becomes, for several centuries, a source of embarrassment rather than heritage. Its achievements minimized by those who needed to believe that what they destroyed was not worth keeping.
But you are here in 1480, and it has not happened yet.
The sun is setting. The drum beats again at the summit of the Templo Mayor. The evening observation. The confirmation that the sun has reached the horizon on schedule. That the day has been correctly counted. That the debt has been met for another 24 hours. Fires are being lit across the city. In the temples, in the courtyards. In the Chinampa gardens where the night fishermen are setting out onto the lake with their torches. The light flickering on the water in doubled patterns that the poets of this civilization, and there are poets, very good ones, writing in a form called cuicatl, song poems of genuine beauty, would recognize as the image they return to most often. The reflection in water, the double world, the shadow of the real.
The Nahuatl word for poetry is in Xochitl, in cuicatl, flower and song. The highest human expression is not rationality, not law, not military victory. It is the combination of beauty and music. The poets of Tenochtitlan are the custodians of the civilization's deepest self-understanding, and the poems they leave, some preserved despite everything, recorded by Spanish priests who saw value in the cultural artifact even while destroying its context, are among the most haunting in the literary record of any pre-Columbian civilization.
One of them, attributed to the poet King Nezahualcoyotl of Texcoco, an ally of Tenochtitlan and one of the most remarkable intellectuals of the 15th century, goes like this, in translation so imperfect that the original shimmer can only be guessed at.
Even jade will shatter. Even gold will break. Even quetzal plumes will tear. One does not live forever on this earth, only for a little while here.
It is a poem about impermanence, written by a man in a civilization that built for permanence. Pyramids, causeways, calendars that counted time in cycles of hundreds of years. It is also, read from this distance, unbearably accurate as prophecy, though prophecy was not its purpose. Its purpose was the same as all great poetry's purpose, to say something true about the human condition in language beautiful enough to be worth saying.
The night before the siege ends, in August 1521, during the last weeks of the battle for Tenochtitlan, a Nahuatl poem is composed that survives in the colonial record. It is the only first-hand Aztec account of the fall written at the time of the fall, and it is 12 lines long, and it ends with this.
Broken spears lie in the roads. We have torn our hair in grief. The houses are roofless now, and their walls are red with blood. Worms are swarming in the streets and plazas, and the walls are splattered with gore. The water has turned red as if it were dyed, and when we drink it, it has the taste of brine.
We have pounded our hands in despair against the adobe walls, for our inheritance, our city, is lost and dead.
The poem has no title. It has no author. It exists because a Spanish friar thought it worth recording, 30 years later from the memory of someone who had been there. And even the friar was not sure what he was preserving, the testimony of a civilization's last witness, or merely the complaint of people who had lost a war. Both things are true. Both have always been true. The poem is what it is, 12 lines from the other side of the largest event in the history of the Americas, written in the language of the people who woke up every morning to the drum, who grew flowers on the lake, who named their highest aspiration in Xochitl, in Cuicatl, flower and song.
The story of the fall has an element that is almost never told. The experience of the allied Tlaxcalans, who fought alongside the Spanish, and what they thought they were doing.
The Tlaxcalans did not think they were betraying their culture. They thought they were winning a war. They had been fighting the Aztec Empire for a generation, resisting incorporation, watching their territory shrink under the pressure of the Flower Wars and the economic blockade that Tenochtitlan imposed. No access to the coastal salt trade, no access to the cotton and cacao of the South, a deliberate strangling of Tlaxcalan prosperity designed to make submission economically rational. And then in 1519, 20 strange men with horses and metal armor and diseases they did not know they were carrying appeared on the coast, and a Tlaxcalan political council looked at their options and made an alliance. The Tlaxcalan warriors who fought in the siege of Tenochtitlan numbered perhaps 100,000, far more than the Spanish forces of perhaps 900 soldiers. They did most of the fighting. They died in enormous numbers. And at the end, when the city fell and the Spanish began building a colonial administration on top of the rubble, the Tlaxcalans discovered that their alliance entitled them to slightly better treatment as colonial subjects, not to freedom, not to sovereignty, not to any of the futures they had imagined. The Spanish did not make allies. They made instruments, and the instruments in the long history of conquest are the ones whose names nobody learns.
There is a mural in Tlaxcala today, painted in the mid-20th century by the muralist Desiderio Hernandez Xochitl, that depicts the alliance between the Tlaxcalans and the Spanish. And in it, the Tlaxcalans are heroes, fighting for their survival against the Aztec Empire that had been strangling them for decades. The mural is not wrong. It is simply a reminder that there was no single indigenous experience of the conquest, that the Aztec Empire had enemies inside the world it dominated, and that those enemies had legitimate grievances, and that the arrival of the Spanish gave those grievances a catastrophic outcome
that nobody involved had foreseen or intended.
What would the Aztec Empire have become if it had continued?
This is an unanswerable question, and historians are rightly cautious about answering it. But the trajectory is worth noting, because it is not obvious that a civilization practicing ritual human sacrifice at the scale Tenochtitlan did was unchanging or unchangeable. The historical record shows an empire in active intellectual ferment, philosophical debate within the priestly class about the nature of the divine, architectural innovation that was refining and expanding the city's infrastructure, commercial networks extending further than any previous Mesoamerican polity had reached, and the same internal tensions between tribute burden and subject resentment, between military expansion and administrative capacity, that every empire faces, and that every empire either resolves or collapses under.
Nezoalcoatl, the poet king of Texcoco, whose verse you heard earlier, was also a philosopher who questioned the polytheistic framework and proposed the existence of a single supreme being, Tlocnahuaque, the lord of the close vicinity, whom he considered the true divine principle underlying the entire Aztec pantheon. He banned human sacrifice in his own territory. He was an ally of Tenochtitlan and a member of the Triple Alliance, and he represents a current of Aztec thought that might, given time, have moved the civilization in directions we cannot now know because time was not given.
We do not know what the Aztec Empire would have become. We know what it was when it was destroyed. A civilization of genuine complexity and achievement, practicing things that are indefensible by any moral framework I know of, and building things of lasting beauty and significance, and growing flowers on a lake. The two cannot be separated, and neither can be erased.
You are lying down now. The lake outside is dark and starred with the reflections of torches. Somewhere across the water, on the mainland, a coyote calls, and the sound crosses the water without the water changing, rippleless, the way sound always travels over water at night. The copal in the shrine corner is burning low. The gods are fed. The sun went down and will, according to everything the priests know, come up again.
The city around you. This impossible, beautiful, violent, flower-growing, pyramid-building, ball-playing, chocolate-drinking, calendar-calculating, poetry-writing city on a lake is sleeping. Or as close to sleeping as a city of 200,000 people ever gets. The market is closed. The drum is quiet. The Pocteca merchant in the next street is counting his cacao beans by lamplight. Planning a route east he will start before the month of the monkey is out, on a day the Tonopouhili deems favorable for travel.
In 40 years, Hernan Cortés will land on the coast.
But that is 40 years away. Tonight, the city is here. The lake is dark. The flowers in the courtyard garden close in the dark and will open with the drum. And the fifth sun, fed and grateful, hangs above the mountains until morning, when it will rise again, because the priests will be there, and the drum will beat, and the debt will be paid, and the sky will hold.
It always has.
Sleep well.